Very, very pleased to have them with us. The formal gathering of the legislature. We want to welcome them. And of course, you all should be on your best behavior. Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to rise today to give my contribution to this historical. See, there's so much anxiety to give my contributions. They got me talking gibberish now, Mr. Speaker. But before I do that, I want to welcome the youth parliamentarians to this honorable house to witness some of the procedures of what we do here. And I'm honored to be one of the members that they're going to watch and see in respect to this debate. But also, Mr. Speaker, to give some apologies to some of the members of the gallery by one of my colleagues here today in his contributions. And Mr. Speaker, I'm quite embarrassed, to be honest with you, but I want to send apologies on behalf of the opposition, and that including the member from North Side. And Mr. Speaker, I'm referring specifically to the member of Prospect, calling persons Muppets, and then suggesting that people should be lucky. Mr. Speaker, each one of us members in this house should be lucky that we're here. And remember that the power lies in those persons who come to this gallery. So on behalf of the opposition, I don't know about the government, but take the apologies on behalf of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, I had a prepared speech, ready, rocking, to go until the Honorable Premier gave his contributions. So unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I have to put this aside for a little bit and address the Premier's contributions last evening. Mr. Speaker, the Premier gave contributions last evening, 35 pages worth. Last morning, thank you, colleague. 35 pages long. Pretty comprehensive, but I dare say, Mr. Speaker, not very factual. And we're going to go through the little areas within his speech that I am a bit concerned about. Now, the first concern, Mr. Speaker, lies on page 2. In the first paragraph, it reads, I pause here to point out in 2013, 3 members now sitting opposite were a part of the progressive slate of candidates. There were members from Savannah, a member from Newlands, and a member from Georgetown Central. So he called me out first, so feel no way when I respond. Now, Mr. Speaker, allow me to refer to some documents that I know this Honorable House will be very familiar with. Because the Premier was insinuating later on in his speech to say, for completeness, Mr. Speaker, I also lay on the table a copy of the PPM's manifesto in 2017. He said, indeed, in a previous sentence, indeed, their smiling faces appear on the cover of the progressive 2013 manifesto, which I would like now to lay on the table of this Honorable House. And what he was inferring to, Mr. Speaker, was the fact that because we oppose the port right now, and because we were a part of the progressives in 2013, that we're acting hypocritically. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me clarify the reasonings behind why we have the opportunity as the opposition to oppose the current government's plan. On page 7 of the 2013 manifesto, it refers to cruise, and I'll read, quote unquote, "Cruise ship landing at last. We need attractive, durable facilities, not new cities. Promote Grand Cayman as a home port destination. Encourage the revival of Central Georgetown as a place for tourists and residents to work and live." And I agree with that. But Mr. Speaker, I'm going to go through a couple more points of this manifesto. But nowhere in this manifesto that I was a part of, or the member from Newlands, or the member from Savannah, said anything about cargo and cruise together. So stop giving insinuations that we are hypocrites to oppose what the government is currently proposing. We have a right. But since he wants to suggest that we are hypocrites, let's talk about some of the hypocritical stuff that this administration is doing right now. On page 8 of their 2013 manifesto, which I was a part of, it says, and under the heading of taking care of our tourism cruise industry, it says, "Protect our natural environment for the benefit of visitors and locals alike." Key word, protect natural environment. Moving on, Mr. Speaker. On page 9, talking under cruise berthing, it reads, "The progressives will move swiftly to getting a cruise berthing built, thereby providing major economic activity, putting the people back to work, boosting the tourism industry. We will not try to build another city offshore Georgetown to compete with existing merchants, but rather to provide berthing for the big cruise ships which currently pass by us. This critically important project we will make happen." Now, nowhere in there does it say anything about cargo. And you might be asking yourself the question, why am I talking about cargo? Well, we will get to that in this debate. Mr. Speaker, I want to move on to the fourth point of the 2013 manifesto that I was a part of that the Premier has highlighted. On page 10, it says there has to be, under revitalization of Georgetown Center, the Georgetown Center has been slowly diminishing in stature, deteriorating in appearance, and losing relevance of the hub of the business and activity. More and more businesses have migrated to Cayman Bay, other locations. However, the seaport remains and will remain as the foreseeable future the center of the city. Talking about the cargo, I want to take this opportunity. No, we're not going to bust that one yet. I'll be back to that in a second. Further down, on same page 10, it says, "This means we must make it attractive for all cruise visitors who support the duty-free and other businesses to remain. The law courts, legislative assembly, the public library, the National Heroes Park, and also permanent fixtures in the city center. The progressives believes that it is of a crucial importance that the city center," and again I want to highlight that, crucial importance of the city center not be allowed to die, but it regains once prominent stature as the hub of economic, commercial, and social activity. Remember that. They want Georgetown Central to be the hub of social activity, because we're going to get to that, Mr. Speaker. Moving to point 5. On page 10, and oh, please allow me to read this part, Mr. Speaker. It's the part where my name is underneath there when they were supporting me, but they didn't support me in 2017, but that's okay, I'm here. Mr. Speaker, under my bio, it says, "Kenneth Bryan, as the youngest member of the progressive team, Kenneth has a naturally affinity for issues affecting young people. He is especially concerned about the high unemployment rate among people under the age of 30. Their education and training. A television reporter by training, Kenneth has seen all sides of Cayman and believes that the progressive's vision for Cayman, where people from all walks of life have equal opportunity to provide for the best hope for the future of these Cayman Islands and its residents." So at least they boost me up a little bit. even though they tried to change that back afterwards. But moving on to another area of the 2013 manifesto, Mr. Speaker. Protecting our environment and our green economy. Living on a small island nation that is vulnerable to the effects of climate change, our generation of Caymanians has a special responsibility to manage our marine, natural, and build environment for generations to follow us. Let me read it again. This is the 2013 manifesto, which they say that I'm a hypocrite, but I'm going to show, I highlighting the parts that why I agree to be a part of the manifesto. Let me read it again. Living on a small island nation that is vulnerable to the effects of climate change, our generation of Caymanians have a special responsibility to manage our marine, natural environment for generations that follow us. Mr. Speaker, I am comfortable with adhering to that 2013 manifesto. But because I have a different position today, the Premier cannot suggest, or this government suggests, that I'm a hypocrite because nowhere in this it had cargo. Not one spot. If you can find it, please correct me when it's your time to speak. But Mr. Speaker, this also boils down to the notion about what my manifesto said. Because remember now, I wasn't elected in 2013. So even if they were to accuse me to say, well, you campaigned with us at the cruise berthing, the people didn't think that that manifesto that I was a part of was good enough to elect me. So that's irrelevant in my eyes, Mr. Speaker. But what is relevant, Mr. Speaker, is when I did get elected under my own manifesto. And allow me, Mr. Speaker, to provide you with a copy because I'm about to read from it, Mr. Speaker. On page 4 of my manifesto, when I got elected in 2017, it reads as such at the bottom. We need to decide what our priority model is in tourism and stick to it. We know that we make more money and more revenue from stayover visitors. Our focus should be on quality, not quantity. A high-end jurisdiction, not a cheap jurisdiction. It is better for our long-term success in tourism. We don't have the landmass to support an all-inclusive approach. And for another set of words we can use is this mega ship approach, because that's the same thing they offer. This is what I got elected on. Not on the 2013 manifesto that the Premier is trying to suggest that myself, the member from Savannah, Newlands, and the member from Savannah. But let me continue on to say what was in my manifesto. I will support efforts to find the most environmentally friendly option for a new seaport as long as it does not come at the expense of the economic survival of our people. So there's a caption in there. There's some limitations. So don't call me no hypocrite. I know what I got elected on. Maybe the government doesn't. But we're going to get into that too. I support the air redevelopment. That's about the airport, so we don't have to go into that, Mr. Speaker. But that's what was in my manifesto that I got elected on. Not the 2013 one that the Premier is accusing me of that I didn't get elected. But since he wants to examine about mandate, because that's what he brought up, is mandate. You have two members, Mr. Speaker, of his government that were former C4C members. And I have a copy of the 2013 manifesto of the C4C members. Two of them are his ministers in his cabinet,
Mr. Speaker. Point of elucidation. There was no membership of C4C. We were independent candidates endorsed by C4C. It's a very different concept.
Again, I take that as a point of clarification.
I want to thank the honorable member, the honorable cabinet minister, for that clarification. I do apologize. She is an independent member and was then and still is, according to her own words. But let's refer to the plan that she subscribed to in 2013. On page 1, no, I apologize, on page 2, under section 2, executive summary, it reads under number 5, sustainable development. Ensure planned and managed growth and development in harmony with our environment. key point number 2 of the C4C plan. Under page 8, remembering, Mr. Speaker, this is what got the 2 ministers, the independent ministers, elected. But now one of them is now a member of the Progressives, the Honorable Minister for Finance. Under page 8, the last 2 paragraphs reads, the natural resources of the Cayman Islands should be protected and managed responsibly to ensure that the future generations inherit a healthy and viable environment. Sustainable development ensures that decisions taken achieve environmental, social, as well as economic outcomes through an integrated, participatory, and transparent approach to decision making. Remember this word now, transparent, because we're going to get back to that. There is a movement towards making the Cayman Islands more sustainable economically, environmentally, and socially. As legislators, we will continue to support these efforts and adopt strategies to further ensure any and all development projects undertaken by public and private sector will be done in an economically, environmentally, and socially responsible and sustainable manner. That's what 2 members of this current government signed up to. So let's talk about mandate in respect to what their mandate is, because they keep on talking about this mandate. But Mr. Speaker, I apologize. You haven't been able to miss this boat because you also ran with a manifesto. It's the manifesto for 2017 Cayman Democratic Party. I am well aware, Mr. Speaker, that there's 3 members that support this current unity government. So let's think about and talk about what is in...
Honorable member, you shall not refer to the speaker again in that manner. There are 2 other members, and if you so choose to refer to them, they are quite capable, I believe, in defending their position, but I'm sure that you don't want me to defend mine. So, for your own benefit, don't refer to the speaker in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and please do accept my apologies. You're correct as a speaker.
I see your exuberance. I expected it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do apologize. I jeopardized your neutrality and forgotten your ability to defend yourself as speaker, so I should never address you directly in respect to this matter. But there are 2 members who support the current cabinet, so please accept my apologies. But those 2 members who are part of this administration and supporting them, and I dare say it may be only 1, but I think everybody knows what we're talking about in respect to that. I've read the manifesto of the CDP. I didn't have no intention of addressing it, but because the Premier called me out about mandate, I had to. And before I go into the key points of this manifesto, nowhere in this manifesto, and it's quite extensive, I must say. Let's see how many pages. Over 38 pages long of a lot of details. Not one place in there it says cargo. Not one spot. So the cargo and the cruise concept, where is the mandate? Because the Premier said in his opening remarks yesterday, they have the mandate because they campaigned on it. So we know that the independent member from West Bay South didn't, she's independent, so she wasn't a part of the PPN's manifesto. We know that in the C4C manifesto, they don't deal with cargo, so where's your mandate? We know that the member from Prospect has changed his mind now that he's elected, but campaigned against it, so where's your mandate? Let's get into the C4C. Point 1, Mr. Speaker. On page 16 of the Cayman Democratic Party manifesto, at the bottom it says, the CDP will review, upgrade, and expand the National Tourism Management Plan aimed at rebranding, repositioning the Cayman Islands as a unique, and a key word, a unique tourism destination, including plans and strategies to expand trade markets, create new markets, and increase visitor arrivals, particularly high-spending visitors. Unique, high-spending visitors. Last sentence of this page. There will also be diversification of our tourism product and expansion of ecotourism facilities. Mr. Speaker, for clarity, let me allow this Honorable House to understand the meaning of ecotourism. It says, by definition, and this definition comes from the Webster's Dictionary online, Mr. Speaker. It says, ecotourism, tourism directed towards exotic, often threatened natural environments intended to support conservation efforts and observe wildlife. Where their mandates are, this is what they campaigned on, the support of the government. But let's move on, Mr. Speaker, to the other parts that the Honorable Premier spoke about in his speech. On page 4, Mr. Speaker, he reads at the bottom paragraph, I can tell this House and everyone outside of it that I join the voices of those who say they wish that they had one in place. And he was speaking to the referendum law. The Premier brags about the fact that he's been in power for 6 years. How long will it take you to do it? He also says the C4C took a year to collect these signatures.
Mr. Speaker, just again, I know that the Speaker is very excited and very enthusiastic to get his point across, but he needs to be very clear unless he's misleading the House and the Chamber for his use of C4C, CDP. What exactly are you trying to say? I think you need to be clear, okay? Because I think your reference earlier was quote unquote mistaken. You might need to clarify that for the listening public as to the record that you just read as well.
You want to clarify which one you're...
Mr. Speaker,
that's what the member is asking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for clarity, I am now speaking about the CPR, not the C4C, and I do apologize if I've made anybody uncomfortable in respect to that reference. 1 second, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, the Premier has had close to 7 years now to implement a referendum law. He also accused the CPR of how long they took to get these signatures. So he was well aware that there was a People's Initiative referendum petition going. Why didn't he prepare the country for it? But yet he claims that he wished he had one. Mr. Speaker, the Premier also spoke about on page 5, at the last paragraph, that he understands, Mr. Speaker, that the People's Initiative referendum is a numbers game. I'm saddened to know that the Premier thinks that this thing that we do in this Honorable House is a game, but unfortunately, I don't. He keeps on talking about good faith. I wonder if the Premier would act in good faith by telling the whole country to come out and vote, rather than to tell them, if you stay home, you're supporting the port. Wouldn't good faith be showing the public to say, everybody come out and vote, but I want you to vote yes, so we can send a clear message to everybody in this country that we support the government? No, that's not good faith. What a good faith is play the games of that 20% that doesn't turn out. So they can say, well, everybody who didn't come is in favor of this port, because he knows it. And everybody in this House knows it, especially the senior politicians, know about that 20% that doesn't come out normally. We've never had more than 80% or around about that. But we're going to play the political game about good faith? That's nonsense, Mr. Speaker. If he had good faith, Mr. Speaker, forgive me, Mr. Speaker, if the Premier was acting in good faith, he would have respected the requests of the CPR group when they emailed him over 7 times to say, Mr. Premier, on behalf of the 20% of the people in this country that we got the signatures from, can we sit down and talk about the process moving forward? That 25%, thank you, 25% of the people, that's good faith if you had the decency to respond. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know he might be paying attention to it because his nonchalant attitude as to say, well, they can talk all the legal advice they want. We took our legal advice too. And that's the problem with this country and this leadership. This disrespect to the hard-working members of the CPR, regardless if we like them or not. Nobody else in this country has been able to accomplish what they have accomplished. First time in our history. And they disrespect them, don't even have a decency. But now you know what they have done? Because of the lack of respect for those persons, and for those who've been calling them, what they call them, forgive me, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Muppets. Muppets they call them. Muppets they call them, Mr. Speaker. Now those Muppets, because they want to protect their democracy, has to go and find money to find lawyers to say, is this unconstitutional? Simply because the attitude of the Premier and this administration of disrespect. I email, you can't give them the decency, whether you like them or not. There's members of this house that I don't like, that I have to talk to, because it's my job. But now, you know what's possible? Here's what the lack of respect and good faith has done. We now have, and I've got it delivered to me too, and Mr. Speaker, allow me to lay this on the floor of the House, because I definitely want this in the records. Tabled, sorry, Mr. Speaker, tabled. Oh, but they got more coming now. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I'm... Yes. Give him that first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What you have in your possession, Mr. Speaker, is an email and letter sent by hand to the attention of His Excellency the Governor, the Premier Ali McLaughlin, Leader of the Opposition, the Attorney General, Auditor General, the Election Supervisor. And in it is an opinion by a local respected attorneys at law, Broadhurst. Now, and I don't think I'm going to read it, because I think almost everybody, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to eat up all my time reading the whole thing out, but I'm going to summarize it. Mr. Speaker, it's a legal opinion by an overseas QC indicating to the Premier that they intend to challenge this bill in its current form. And it gives the grounds within it. And some of those grounds, and just for a little coverage of it, because I think it's in the public domain already, they intend to challenge it on the basis of 5, thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5A, the setting of the referendum question without first enacting a law that prescribes the manner in which the referendum question is to be set. Now, some people may think that that's not a big deal, but I'm going to bring up something that the Attorney General is going to have to deal with and will come relevant as to why we should have had a referendum law before we did this. And I know some people say, well, boy, we had referendums before, and we never had a law, a generic law that falls under all referendums. But this one is rather unique, never done before, and we have a problem. But we'll talk about that a little later on. The other part that they were concerned about is the settling of the referendum date without first enacting a law that prescribes the manner in which the referendum date should be scheduled. Third one, the exclusion of application of Part V of the Elections Law 2017, which addresses campaign finance limits. Now, that is a big deal, because you know why? They're using the public's finances to campaign against the people. You don't think that those people who organize the CPR are Caymanians too? They pay their taxes too. You might like what they say, but when they put their taxes in and you use their money to campaign against them, it's not right. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my lovely wife for reminding me about the Brexit referendum and the fact that they gave equal amounts of campaign finance to those against Brexit and those for Brexit. That's our mother country. That's why we should have had the referendum law before. But that's the key point for the Attorney General. We'll get to that shortly. Next one. The exclusion of the application of Section 91(1) of the Elections Law 2017, which would otherwise ban the sale of intoxicating liquor on referendum day. Now, I'm careful with this one because, boy, I have a few people in my ear have a little drink now and then, you know. So, I am mindful that regardless if it's illegal to buy it on referendum day, a person can buy it the day before and sit home and drink and still have the concerns that people are worried about. But, Mr. Speaker, if what I'm worried about in respect to this intoxicating liquor sales on referendum day is, I get what the Premier is talking about in respect to, well, they got businesses and Christmas parties and all that. I get that. And I'm not here to hamper the business community. But remember now, when you do this, you're starting to set a precedent now. The next time, it won't be around Christmas, it will be in the middle of April. What are you going to tell a business owner who say, I want to sell my liquor this day? You did it the last time. Be very careful what you're doing. You're setting a precedent. And they have a right to say, challenge that concern. But Mr. Speaker, I better move on because my time is going to run up very fast. This challenge simply says, can you please address the concerns in it? Because otherwise we will challenge. Now, the Premier has basically said, go ahead, we accept your challenge. Mr. Speaker, before I go on to further parts of the Premier's speech, I remember the member from Georgetown West talking about the fact of getting responses from his constituents, and I'm proud of you for that. I like that. That's what I do. Yesterday morning, Mr. Speaker, I sent out a message on my phone because I try my best to get direct involvement of my people as much as I can. And let me just bring it up exactly what I said. I sent a message out that said, the question, in quotation, should the Cayman Islands continue to move forward with the building of the cruise, berthing, and enhancement cargo port facility? Good morning, everyone. As I go today to debate the referendum bill in the Legislative Assembly, I wanted to get a good sense of your views on the referendum question. Please, I ask you to simply respond to my WhatsApp message with a yes or a no. This process will help me best represent you. God bless. Have a wonderful day. Kenneth Bryan, MLA, GTC. 12 yeses. 12. 389 participants in my WhatsApp 2 broadcasts. 12 yeses. So, in all due respect to the member of Georgetown West, your people are supporting you. I'm happy for that. My people are telling me no. Now, I now have to justify the other 12 who say, boy, Kenneth, I want you to support it. But I'm here to do a democratic process. And that democratic process is to go through by the majority. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will put a caveat on that, which is there's 1,200 and I can't remember the last number, 1,240 something since the last list that came out in my constituency. And now I wish I had the WhatsApp number for every single voter in Georgetown Central, but I don't. I got elected by 495. Now, 495 of those don't necessarily have the efficiency of WhatsApp. I just got my mother on it the other day. Now she hooked. But most of my members are senior members, so they wouldn't be able to have access to a WhatsApp and get instant data. But I did a survey, and many of these members in this house would recall me talking about it in the media about me surveying my people. So those ones who weren't necessarily on WhatsApp, I talked to them too. And the general attitude in my constituency is no. But to add to it, here's an email, and I won't say who it came from, yesterday morning. It says, "Dear MLA Brian, as a registered voter within your constituency and a citizen of the Cayman Islands, I am writing to you today to inform you that I, 1, support the push of the change of the date on the cruise port referendum on December 19th. I believe that all registered voters should be allowed to vote in the referendum, including those 220 people. There should be no alcohol sales on election day, including campaign finance should be addressed. And number 5, question, make cargo a separate issue." And let me go on to say that constitutional law experts have found the referendum bill in its current form to be unlawful and in violation of the Constitution, and asked me to do my best to change it. Obviously, I had to call that person back and say, listen, there's only a limited amount of what I can do because I'm in the opposition and this is a government thing. But I take the opportunity to read another document, and this document is a letter addressed to the elections supervisor on the 16th of September. Now, I want to put a caveat on that because I've had discussions with the supervisor of elections, and there was some electronic delays, and unfortunately, this letter didn't get to him to some time after actually close to the October 1st deadline, or possibly after. But it did go to the other person I sent it to, which was the cabinet secretary. Now, you may say, well, why is that relevant? Let me explain why. Because it goes back to the request of one of my constituents about what she wants me to do on her behalf as her representative, talking about those 220 people who are not going to get registered to vote, not going to be able to participate in this referendum. On the 16th of September, I sent a letter to the Cabinet Secretary. It says, "I write to express my concern that the newly registered voters in the Cayman Islands may miss their democratic right to vote in the upcoming referendum. According to my understandings of the Elections Law 2017 revisions, persons who have been registered to vote after July 1st would not be able to participate in the referendum if called before January 1st, which is exactly the situation that we have right now. A number of newly registered Caymanians have voiced their dissatisfaction with this potential reality and find it to be very unfair. Losing out on the opportunity to participate in a historical constitutional enacted provision, this letter could be for naught if the Cabinet decides to have the referendum after January 1st of 2020. But I should note that the Premier has indicated publicly that he has the intention, that it is the intention of the Cabinet to call the referendum as soon as possible after the verification process has been completed. Does this mean that before January the 1st, 2020, at this point, no one knows, which gives the legitimacy to my concern? It should also be considered that the public was only recently notified on the 11th day of September that the constitutionally recognized petition by the CPR group was officially verified by the office, ultimately leading to a referendum, though it may be seen by everyone that they had enough time to get registered for the possibilities of a referendum has been in the public domain for some time now, but it can only be expected that persons who wanted to be registered now because the referendum is certain now. With that in mind, under the principles of democracy, the public must be granted a reasonable amount of time to be able to register and participate in the upcoming referendum whenever called by Cabinet. Therefore, as a representative for Georgetown Central and the people of the Cayman Islands, I'm asking you, the supervisor of election, to use the provisions within the elections law to make the recommendations to Cabinet that they may allow the required time for persons to be on the register of elections list used in the referendum to be up to 30 days before whichever date that will be announced by the cabinet for the referendum. It should be noted that the supervisor of election exercising his powers via elections office is not unprecedented, as this has been done in the past elections. Therefore, in the absence of a referendum law, I think as the supervisor of election, you would accept that this is indeed a reasonable request. Mr. Howell, on behalf of the many concerned Caymanians, we look forward to a favorable reply early. Now, I want to make sure that I don't throw the supervisor of elections under the bus, because he's a good man. He did say to me that the section that I highlighted, it doesn't seem after legal advice there's any provisions under that we could make changes to the elections law. But let me tell you a little something, because that doesn't get the government out of this yet, you know. The supervisor is out of the way, but not the government. Because the elections law, we can't go back and change that. At least not now. They're not going to do that. But this is a brand new bill. This is a brand new bill that we're creating, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, have you moved on from this letter?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a brand new bill, so you're not going back to change anything. If they wanted to put provisions in this, because we don't have a referendum law, you see, if we had created a referendum law a long time ago, we could have put provisions in place to update our archaic elections law that we have now, that is from 19 how long. We would have been able to put in a more efficient, more electronically motivated election registration process, where people can go within 30 days of any election process and say, I want to be counted in the democratic process. You know how long it takes to get on the list? 6 months to participate in your democracy. We could have changed that. Brand new bill. Right now. We could have put it in this, but we chose not to. When I say we, I apologize. The government chose not to. Not the opposition. We had nothing to do with the drafting of this. Our job is to critique and represent and give advice. Thank you, Minister. But yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what transpired just now is something that I'm happy about, because it shows that regardless of our differences politically, this is about politics. It's about policy, never personal. Remember, and particularly because the youth members are here, I want you to recognize that we're still friends after this, but this is just a robust debate about a policy position, okay? So, I appreciate the joke, Minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, allow me to move, and I think I clarified that point about the fact of the letter that I wrote to the election supervisor. Now let me go on to another little area of the Premier's speech. Matter of fact, let me back off the Premier for a little bit, because they're going to say that I targeted him.
Make him catch his breath. No, you're afraid of what he responded?
No, I got enough licks. He got my skin hard now.
Deal with him. Well, if you want to say put some belt on his back.
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Finance said in his deliberations just a few minutes ago that the cargo and cruise was a part of the PPM for over 10 years, or something to that like, and I stand to be corrected, but he said at least the last 2 administrations. And I'm almost certain that I clarified that just a minute ago to say that there's no mandate here. No mandate about cruise and cargo. So he need to get his facts correct. There was a mandate for cruise, but there was no mandate for cargo. This is 2013. Now, Mr. Speaker, I see that the Minister of Finance is indicating that maybe he might want a point of clarification. We can get the hands out to see. Okay. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to move now to an area that is really, really concerning to me. And this has to do with the mixing of the votes. Mr. Speaker, in Section 58 of this bill is nothing less than a clever maneuver to disenfranchise the opposition members, deceive the voters of each electoral district, and dupe the other members of the that supports the government. Mr. Speaker, the bill calls for all the votes in the referendum to be mixed together. Section 58 1A and 2 reads as such: upon the receipt of sealed boxes from the returning officers under subsection 1, supervisor shall break the seal thereon in the presence of observers and any other persons who are lawfully in the counting station at the time and the place of the ballot therein, contained in the appropriate ballot box, which shall be provided. And in such box, all the ballot papers removed from the ballot boxes for the electoral districts in the referendum shall be placed and mixed together for the purposes of being counting. Now, I know some of my other members have highlighted some problems already about it, but I need to reiterate how disappointed I am with this section of the bill. Because what that does, and for the listening audience, when you mix all the votes together, no member of this honorable house will know how their electoral district felt about the port. None of us in here. And I think this was an intended move, and I'm going to explain why. You see, Mr. Speaker, if one of the members on the government side, if the numbers were counted by electoral district and the results came in, and one of the members over there on the government side showed that majority of the people in their constituency said no to the port, I believe the Premier is afraid that that person will say, sorry, Mr. Premier, I can't support the port no more, because my job is to represent the majority of the people in my constituency. That's your job. Your job is to represent the people in your constituency. The same reason the member from Georgetown West sent a message out to all his people and say, tell me how you feel, and everybody came back saying yes. This will be the process upon which we can be concreted to be sure what our people want. Give the data broken down, but here's what. Now, I believe the intention was he didn't want to lose any support over there because he's not sure which one of those constituencies may come back more in favor against the port. But here's why I'm more disappointed. Because you're disenfranchising me to do my job on behalf of the people of Georgetown Central. I am here to represent the people of Georgetown Central in this honorable house. I want to know what the majority says in Georgetown Central. Because if the majority comes back and say, listen, we want the port, then I'm going to have to swallow every word I spelled here today and get up and say I support the government. That's my job. And get a shovel like the opposition leader said and come out there and dig the hole with you. But you don't want to do that. You're disenfranchising me from doing my job. Now, I did a little table, Mr. Speaker, just trying to understand. I said, okay then, maybe it's something that I don't realize, that would cause them to want to do this count on a national level. And I tried to wait to hear it from the Premier, but up to now he hasn't said it. So I did my own tally. So here's just a little simple pros and cons to the two different styles of results. On the national results, the pros are, you're going to get the results. We're all going to know what the country feels as a whole. Here's the cons. MLAs will be disenfranchised by not knowing how to support their own people. Second one, voters will not know how the breakdown of the whole country was done. Data is always important. We all know that we're in the world of data today and analysis. 4, the count will actually take longer for the results to come in because you have to move them from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction to count them together, rather than just count them in the polling station they're in already. Now, in other jurisdictions, in other countries, that's where the mix-up with the polls go. That's when the boxes go missing or more ballots be added when you're transporting from one place to the next. You hear 4 boxes left and 5 boxes ended up being there. So why would we even want to jeopardize that process by adding another level of scrutiny or another level of fear of something going wrong? Why don't you just count right there? So let's go now to the district level results. What are the pros? The MLAs will not be disenfranchised. They'll know how to best act on behalf of their people. 2, the results will come in just like how the results would come in a national vote. 5, the results will come in quicker than they would do on a national vote. Less chance for interference, and the voters will have a better breakdown. What are the cons from a district level? Not one con at all. There's nothing stopping them from doing the count on a district level. So if there's no cons at all, no negatives, why is this government not willing to change that process? So I said to myself, well, maybe it might be too technical because we've gone this far now and the changes bill and all these notes and all that, it might be taking too long. So I called the supervisor of elections last night after the debate. I said, Mr. Wesley, would it be a big difficult thing to change this section of the bill? He said, no, Mr. Bryan. All they got to do is say it. All you have to do is say the word and they can do it because it's the same process. But we don't want the country to know how the vote went. You know why? Because you want to be adamant that it goes through regardless. You do not want the opportunity, and each one of you members need to vote on this yourself, you know. On this specific part of the bill, because I'm going to be bringing it up. Each one of you don't want the information on how to represent your own people. That's what you're saying. And every member in this community will be watching this house. And they're going to say, but hold on, minister, or hold on, councillor, or hold on, deputy speaker. You mean to tell me now, I didn't want to know how I felt? That's what they're going to be saying. Because I know every member on the opposition wants that part to be changed. I know that the CPR group and the QC who is going to challenge it thinks it needs to be changed. So, go ahead. I'll tell you one thing, I ain't supporting it with that part in it, but simply on the basis of democracy and disenfranchising me. Now, if I don't want to have to count with every single other one of them and just leave Georgetown Central out, allow me to do my job. I need to know what my people want. Mr. Speaker, let me get to probably the most important part of this debate. Mr. Speaker, can I get a check on the time, please?
One hour and 5 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn now to one concern I have, which is the current list that was released by the Elections Office has indicated that over 200 people that have registered will miss the deadline, according to the elections law, to be on the final list in the referendum. Now, we've debated a little bit about that time thing, and some people feel uncomfortable about that, and I understand where they're coming from. But the government's argument about, well, you know, there is a process and there's checks and balances, it's kind of hard to argue. It's hard to argue, even though I know they can make the necessary changes, but it is the law. Here's where the other problem comes in. What about the 45 deceased people who are on the list? And the fact that the premier, and let me get his exact quotes here. The premier himself, and we're talking about the 45 deceased people who are on it. The premier said in a quote when speaking to the Cayman Compass to a question that was, what if more votes in the referendum are no, but the bar is not met for 50% plus one is not reached? The premier quoted saying, we will proceed with the project because essentially people not turning out to vote is a clear indication that they are not opposed to the project. Now I want the premier to tell me how 45 deceased people go come out of their grave to come down to the polling station to vote. Now, we have the Attorney General who is here, and his job is to advise his government, but I want to know how they're going to get out of that. Because the premier is saying anybody who don't come, who is on the list, will be counted as a yes. How can we count a person that's no longer with us, now with their maker, to be a yes? Mr. Speaker, forgive me. I keep on going different directions. I have to remember to look towards you. But Mr. Speaker, let me explain something. An election process is a process of democracy. Now, democracy is a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of the state, typically through elected representatives of the people. Now, Mr. Speaker, I respect those who've passed on, and I thank them for their contributions to this country, and I sympathize with the families who are probably still missing them. But I don't think, Mr. Speaker, it's right to define them as eligible members of the state. Because ultimately that's what the premier is saying, that 45 people who have passed on to see their maker is going to vote yes in the referendum. So how are we going to fix that? Because the bar is set at 50% plus one of the registered persons on the list. And they are on the list as deceased persons. Now, here's the interesting part. Now you see, that's going to be difficult, Mr. Speaker, for them to get over. And I suspect that they're going to find something to do that, and I would rightfully accept that. That's what has to be done. But if they can find the necessary changes to take 45 people off, they can find the necessary changes to add 220 Caymanians who want to participate in this referendum. So if you can make the changes, take them off. You can make the changes to add them on. So anyway, you're going to take this, and either you're going to put them on, or you're going to have an unfair election that potentially can be challenged because we don't have a referendum law. And that's going back to my point I had before. Why it's serious is because of situations like this. If we had a referendum law that recognized the peculiarness of a 50% plus one of all registered voters, we would have provisions. We would have had provisions in that referendum law to deal with that peculiar situation, because we would have thought about it. But we don't have a referendum law, Mr. Speaker. So how are we going to rectify that? And if they come up with the laws or the ways of process to do so based on some other jurisdiction's way, why can't they find the same willingness and heart and drive to find a way to put those 220 people on? No, they don't want to do that, Mr. Speaker. You know why they don't want to do that? Because they do not want the people of this country to be involved in the democracy. That's what this is about, Mr. Speaker. They believe that that generation of people, the millennials and Generation Z, are too concerned about the environment. Let me tell you one study showed, and this has to do, and I wish the Minister for Tourism would pay attention to this. Because it's an interesting study, Mr. Speaker. It was actually at a forum here that I saw it. I can't remember. I think it was the Chamber of Commerce Economic Forum, where it spoke about the behaviors of millennials and Generation Z. Now, Mr. Speaker, just for clarity, the millennials are persons who were born from 1980 to 1994. Generation Z are persons born in 1995 to 2015, and we have some of them in the gallery here today, Mr. Speaker. But in the study, it showed that those persons, their spending habits are driven differently than Generation X and baby boomers. Generation X are born from 1965 to 1979. Baby boomers, which is most of us in this honorable, no, not more, I know not. Baby boomers are persons like yourself, Mr. Speaker, like the honorable member from Savannah and the Attorney General. Baby boomers are born from 1994 to 1964. Now, the relevance of that, Mr. Speaker, is the behavior patterns of spending. Because that's what this report is all about. This report is about money, about the economy. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker. The spending habits of these persons are this. They are more environmentally conscious. They spend their money on products that promote protection of the environment. And matter of fact, they shun any services or products that are harmful to the environment. So you know what that means, Mr. Speaker? That means that that generation, when they become in that bracket of having strong disposable income, when they get to the 25 to the 35, when they're actually, okay, I'm actually going to go on a cruise because I have a job and I've had this job for a couple of years, now I'm going to treat myself. When they start to think about places to go, you know where they're going to go to? Unique places that protect their environment.
Honorable Member, we have reached the hour of interruption. I'll call on the Minister to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 to allow us to continue beyond the hour of 4:30. The Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 that the business of the House may continue past the hour of interruption.
Question is, the Standing Order 10-2 be suspended in order for the business of this Honorable House to continue after the hour of 4:30. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. The House continues after the hour of 4:30. Honorable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just talking about the spending habits of the latter two generations of human beings, and a study that was showing that these millennials and Generation Z, their spending habits are based on certain principles. Principles based on equality, protection of their environment, of fairness. This is what drives them, Mr. Speaker. So, when we decide to damage our environment, create this sardine type of approach to our tourism, that's not going to be attractive to them. They want natural things. They want to drink drinks in a straw that made out of paper that can be disposable, or don't drink out of straw, period. Mr. Speaker, I was hoping that I would hear some data from the Minister of Tourism thinking about the next generation of spenders and how they feel. Because I know that the Minister was there at the same conference I was at. Have they considered the environmental damages? And another thing, Mr. Speaker, the fact that the negative stories that have gone across the world. We're in BBC, we're on CNN, all the media houses about the Cayman Islands, damaging our little ecosystem that we have. Have they thought about what damage that's going to do to our tourism product? Have they thought about the fact that the Generation Z and the millennials are listening? You see, Mr. Speaker, many of the members that are making this decision today are going to be well gone, well retired, and going to be all right. But when we become the Florida type, and many of the new spenders go, I don't like that. I'm going to go to somewhere exotic and unique, like the United Democratic Party members had said in their manifesto, talking about unique, eco-friendly environments. When they start to go to that, will Cayman be that? No, not when you add more and more people to Stingray City. No, Cayman, you don't go out there unless it's a Sunday. And God forbid, Mr. Speaker, you can't even go there on a Sunday now. Talking about sustainability. Mr. Speaker, let me move on to the other part of concern. Mr. Speaker, I want to move on now to probably the most important part of concern with the government's proposed project, the cargo element. Mr. Speaker, in the government's current plans, they say they will be getting an upgrade to the cargo portion of the dock facilities, somewhere in the region of, forgive me, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I stand to be corrected, but I think it's about 20 million for the cargo part, Mr. Minister. Okay, Mr. Speaker, about $20 million for the upgrade element. The current plans that they have and the current operations that we have right now is cruise during the day and cargo at night. But in the same vein of this project development, they're also talking about the revitalization of Georgetown Central. Let me not say Georgetown Central to make it political, Georgetown period. Because all Georgetowners care about our capital. But the government, I've heard about talks, and this is on the radio and amongst some members, about the rezoning of the capital to allow living quarters and businesses to operate in those seam buildings on the bottom, and then you have apartment styles at top, quite like we have in New York City and the like. Really, I like that. I've heard about incentives about encouraging restaurant styles, port, and cafeterias at night. Sounds very dazzling. I love it. Now you tell me, how you going to do that when you hear the trucks going all night long, straight through our town? How you going to have an apartment building, sleeping at night, you live in quarters, and you hear all night long? How that going to work? Let me see. Let me help for those for the Hansards. Vroom, vroom, vroom. When you hear the trucks passing. Mr. Speaker, I fail to understand exactly how they plan to make this work. One of the main distractions for night businesses operators today is the fact that the district has turned into an industrial environment once the sun goes down. It is a part of the Port Authority's work schedule, and I don't blame them for it. They're just doing their job. Once it becomes dark, the heavy equipment machinery comes to life. From the operations on the cargo to the trucks going back and forth all night long from the capital center. The sights and sounds of this necessary process for our imports is the main cause of the death of the nightlife in Georgetown. And Mr. Speaker, I was reliably informed just last night that around 2000 and forgive me, Mr. Speaker, the schedule for port operations to nighttime was around 2001, 2002, give or take. Now, for those who are old enough to know, that's right around the time that you slowly saw the decline of Georgetown Central doing this for nighttime life. There used to be cafeterias, there used to be lots of port restaurants, because there wasn't no noise at night. It was a dead calm port, beautiful glass water. The ambience was there. As soon as they went over to cargo at night, each one of those businesses slowly declined. And I'm going to give you an example. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to speak to a Caymanian business owner, one who owned and operated a business downtown primarily at night. And he recalled the slow demise of his business in Georgetown Harbor area when the policy decision was made to move from daytime to nighttime operations of cargo. He was serving amazing cuisines in the Cayman Islands to residents and visitors alike who would come to the city capital. But having to sit down and listen to the loud sounds of trucks passing by while they enjoy their meals that could potentially be in the hundreds of dollars for the bill for the food, slowly but surely patrons decide that that was not the environment they wanted to be in. He was forced to close the business, and the business that was providing opportunities for Caymanians to work in. So again, I ask the question, if this government truly want to revitalize Georgetown Central, how are they going to do it unless on the planning just to put some trees out there? That's all on the plan to do? How do you expect to get the nightlife and get it back to where it once was? Now let me go to the Premier's speech and a few things he said about the cargo. Because I'm worried, I'm really concerned about this cargo thing. Now, I got 3 quotes. According to the Premier, this government has not even thought about it. I apologize, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if we accomplish the rezoning of the capital to allow living quarters, we would still have the same problem. Imagine sleeping on the 2nd floor or the 3rd floor of a building to hearing trucks pass by your window all night long. Mr. Speaker, the cargo operations have to move from the capital. The government accepts that, you know. They know it can't stay there. We got a government building. We have the Legislative Assembly literally 200 feet away. The courthouse 200 feet away. The post office, the National Post Office 200 feet away. The government building 400, call it 500 feet away. This is our city capital. And we're talking about expansion to 100,000 people. Mr. Speaker, the cargo operations have to move from our capital. What happens when the population increases and our cargo facilities have to run 24 hours a day to accommodate the importation of foods and goods for our people? How do we have crews and cargo working together at the same time? We can't. It's inevitable the cargo have to be moved. We should have been thinking about this and moving it years ago. But according to the Premier, this government has not even thought about it. Mr. Speaker, allow me to read verbatim record of the Premier on a local radio show called For the Record. This show was aired on the 14th of October, and the Premier's answer was in response to a host about the government's plans on the port and the cargo operations in the breakers area of the island. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, "Yes, this is another one of Johan Moxham's bites of misinformation. I heard it myself across the show last week and would have repeated it too as well. This government, certainly of which I've been at the helm for the past 6 years, never even discussed moving the cargo port from Georgetown." Another quote, "The reason for that is quite simple. You think if we have a fight to enhance it there, can you imagine us trying to put the cargo in North Sound or South Sound or Frank Sound, whichever some of these things that I've heard being discussed?" Quote, end quote. Another quote, I know I've heard it from other people around, and I have seen some plans who have talked about putting a cargo in the Sound there where breakers that would be breach of the reef and come across the road and leading into the lakes created by the results of the quarries. I've seen those documents, I've heard those discussions about that, but none of that is this government's initiative, nor does the government endorse that. As I said, it's a big enough challenge for us to get through the enhancement of the cargo port and building the cruise port in the area that has been recognized as the natural harbor for Cayman for as long as we have been settled in Georgetown. And the last line, so we are certainly not about to try to put it somewhere else. That's a problem for me as the representative for Georgetown Central, because if you have no intentions of moving the cargo, knowing what cargo facilities offer in respect to the type of equipment, we're going to get into those comments shortly because he gives a good description of to what to expect. You don't plan to move it. You're not thinking about the future. You know that we are eventually going to grow. Rather, I was expecting him to actually say, you know something? Yes, the government is thinking about moving it. We haven't made any agreements with anybody, but we know it have to move. He went as far as to say, we're not moving it at all. So what is Georgetown going to look like 10, 20 years from now? Is this the administration that plans to lead the future of this country? Where the capital is at, they want to increase the cargo facility. No vision. But oh, this is the plan of the future. Where's the vision in that? Mr. Speaker, you heard the words from the Premier himself. We, meaning the government, has no intentions of moving the cargo operations of this country to somewhere else. And to make it matters worse, Mr. Speaker, may I recall the Premier suggesting that the government's intending to use the same port as a transshipment point. Mr. Speaker, I refer to the report, October 27th, 2017, Sustainability, Empathy, and Prosperity. On page 19 of 2017, in this Honorable House, the Premier said, an enlarged modern cargo facility is key to our ongoing economic development and will give us the ability to accept larger ships, reducing shipping costs and consequently reducing the cost of goods bought locally. Now you heard the Honorable Member from Northside dispute that concept. It ain't happening. Don't think you're going to bring down don't stop selling this tidbit words to make people bite into your idea about it's going to bring down the cost to do this. You heard him dispute it. The Port Authority has also received considerable interest from the shipping companies that not only wants to bring their larger ships here, but have indicated that Grand Cayman could serve as a transshipment port for perishable cargo of Central America. Mr. Speaker, I know that me and you have gone on a few trips as a part of our duties to this Honorable House. And I know that you and I have seen some ports, and I know that many people who are listening today have seen some cargo shipment ports and what they look like, what kind of equipment is on it. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask again the Premier and this administration, which revitalization are you truly committed to for Georgetown Central? When you have your intentions is to create out there to be an industrial type of attitude. And he says so himself. Let me get back to what he said just yesterday morning. That was in 2017. So he's maintaining his attitude. We know that. This administration is maintaining that. On page 21 of his speech yesterday morning, Mr. Speaker, the Premier said, "The last economic benefit I want to highlight concerns the enhancement of the cargo facilities. We have to accept that our current port is too small, too crammed, too inefficient." So he recognizes that we are going to have to expand. Expanding, right? "It barely meets the needs of our country now. And if Cayman continues to prosper and grow, as this government certainly intends it should, we need better cargo handling facilities." So he's aware of growth. He's well aware of growth. He continues to say, "The addition of a third small berth for smaller ships and barges hauling," continuing on page 22, "hauling the likes of aggregate and cement will be a significant improvement, which allows operations of other vessels that cannot be done at this time." What other vessels is he talking about? These big old industrial type ships? That's what he want to bring downtown as a cargo? That's part of his revitalization of Georgetown Central? Moving that berth out of the way of container operations allow a simultaneous operations of container vessels and bulk cargo. The improvements will mean that the port can use new specialized cargo cranes rather than inefficient converted construction cranes that we use now. What kind of specialist cranes are you talking about? Let me ask you something, Mr. Speaker. We have one special crane right now. It's down in Industrial Park. It's probably about 400 feet in the air. Tall. Imagine that out there. Now you tell me now, which restaurant gonna go out there and look at some cranes operating at night time? Where is your vision? Where is your plan for revitalization of Georgetown Central? When it's the natural harbor. Mr. Speaker, the CDP manifesto talked about high-end persons. Which high-end people gonna go look at no cargo? I hear my colleague suggesting maybe they might put some Christmas lights on the cranes to make it look good. But Mr. Speaker, all I'm trying to do here is highlight that the pieces do not match to the plan. Now, this is actually more about cruise tourism. And me highlighting the fact of the concerns of cargo also proves that there is a real concern of other people saying, listen, I may support your port, your cruise port, but I don't support your cargo. That's where that concept comes from. Because nobody wants cargo in the central part of our district. And then you tell the people that you don't even think about moving it. So what's your plan for the future? But you're going to campaign in 2021 and say, we are the best government, vote us in again, with no vision for the future. Mr. Speaker, I love Georgetown Central. I born in Georgetown. My father is a Markfield. My mother is a Kim and Braca. She's a Bryan. And I remember going right out there in the harbor and jumping off out there. Please do not turn one of the Cayman's best natural harbors into an industrial site. Convince me that you have a plan for Georgetown. Convince me that you're not just going to allow everything to move to Cayman Bay. Because that's what's happening. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move my attention now to some of the environmental concerns. And before I do that, though, I want to highlight that my good colleague from Northside assisted me with some information when they talk about these mega ships coming with these sardine can type of stuff them in one big old ship and bring them down here. They don't spend no money going back on the ship empty-handed. Mr. Speaker, from a printed version of the Sea Trade Cruise, and if you need to have a look at it, it has a schedule of all the ships that are being built currently at the moment from 2018 to 2027. Would you like a copy of it, Mr. Speaker? Or allow me to just refer to it? Thank you, Mr.
If you're going to read, I need
I'm not going to read. I'm just going to refer to my notes. I wrote some notes down, so I won't read.
Are you going
from
to quote figures from it?
it. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I asked if you're going to do that, I need a copy.
It's my only copy, Mr. Speaker, so I please ask if I can have it back.
If you're going to quote from it, we're going to get a copy of it, and then you want it laid on the
Okay,
table?
I'll come back to it then, if you would like.
Okay, we're going to get a copy.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to go into some of the concerns about the 7 Mile Beach. Now, I'm happy that most of my colleagues have already summarized most of the concerns there. But I wrote down some of the key words that came to mind when I think about this debate and the port. And they're going to come up shortly. The words are trust, gamble, transparency, honesty, fairness, choice, attitude, risk. First thing that comes to my mind when I think about all the elements of this discussion. And I'll show you how they're relevant, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's safe to say the biggest concern of all the concerns the last few years in talking about this port is the effect on the 7 Mile Beach. This is a concern for me also, naturally. This concern is one of the biggest issues for most of us MLAs and the general public. And we all rely on specialists to determine whether this concern is legitimate or not. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government has requested such studies to be completed, which is necessary, and I agree with that. We have all heard about the Baird and Associates report. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, in the 2005 report, if you were to take that report as a sole deciding factor on the effects of 7 Mile Beach, you may be comforted that there is no negative effects at all. In the report on page 20, in the last paragraph under Project Impacts 8.1, it says, the project will not result in any significant impact on 7 Mile Beach.
Honorable Member, what are you reading from?
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker.
What you sent me was a sea trade cruise, which begins in the year 2018 to down to 2027.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Give me 1 second, sir. Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I thought that this has already been tabled in this Honorable House. It is the Baird report from 2015 in September, the non-technical summary, proposed cruise berthing facility Grand Cayman. I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I thought this Honorable House had already had discussions, and therefore I didn't think I had to lay it in the House, but I'm happy to provide you with a copy of it now. The Baird report, proposed cruise berthing facility Grand Cayman, non-technical summary, September 15, 2015. But Mr. Speaker, I'm only referring to it. I don't have to look at it. That is. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll hand it to the.
Because there are so many reports and so many figures thrown around that I need to know what you're reading.
I agree, Mr. Speaker.
And if you're going to give figures, then I need to know.
Mr. Speaker, I do apologize, and I've handed the report.
And also, you need to say what page, because right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with letters and speeches. Copies 9. That would make 10. So I really need to know page, at least what you're speaking from. I don't have this one. No, I don't.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that little exchange did not take away from my time, Mr. Speaker, but I hope that you do have the report in your hand right now. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and refer to it because I've handed you the report, and the page is page 20, and it's highlighted in your hand, sir. On page 20, in the last paragraph under Project Impacts 8.1, it says, the project will not result in any significant impact on 7 Mile Beach, as no significant sediment transport occurs between Georgetown Harbor and 7 Mile Beach. This conclusion is based on the analysis of historical beach survey data and numerical modeling of the coastal processes, and is consistent with the results of an earlier study undertaken by DOE Seymour 2000. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is just that one document I'm referring to, and I'm going to move on. So that is one report offering comfort to the concern of negative effects on 7 Mile Beach. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to be mindful that that report is paid for by a very biased party. That being the government, who wants a favorable result. I'm not suggesting that it is, but who wants a favorable result in the report to justify what they want to move forward with in respect to this project. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not suggesting that the narrators of this report was influenced to give the report to suggesting that nothing would happen to 7 Mile Beach, nor am I suggesting that this government offered any influence either. But influence like this has happened before in many jurisdictions across the world. So I'll take that report with a pinch of salt. But to compound my reservations of the Baird report comes another report from a respected specialist in the field and ocean behavior, claiming the total opposite of what the Baird report says. In September of this year, the Central Caribbean Marine Institute released a statement saying, and Mr. Speaker, I'll provide you with a statement. Mr. Speaker, I'll provide you with, Sarge. This is a copy of the Central Caribbean Marine Institute press release statement. It says, we recognize that there are many complex processes contributing to the 7 Mile Beach sand budget, but what is proposed will undoubtedly affect the Cayman's most famous beach. Positive results from coral regeneration and relocation practices also continue to be challenging, with corals across the Caribbean region typically suffering 80% majority within 2 years of relocation. Little hope for replenishing the sand on the 7 Mile Beach is long-term 7 Mile Beach in the long term due to the limited proven success of coral relocation as a mitigation strategy. The proposed dock construction will disrupt the entire ecosystem by removing the corals and the sand. CCMI is concerned about the detrimental impacts of 7 Mile Beach and the coral reef ecosystem in Georgetown area, and urges all stakeholders to really take stock whilst we still have time. Now, Mr. Speaker, remember I was saying to you there were some words that came to my mind. Choice, risk, trust. What is happening now is I have to go by the words of this government, who has been behaving in a particular way that causes me not to trust them. Because I have an institution that is recognized by this government, who this government has given, if I am corrected, forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a company that is recognized in the Cayman Islands and respected in the Cayman Islands. So we have, and I would say both of them are respected, but we have two of them who, remember I said before, we're not specialists in this field, so we have to trust the specialists, but we have two of them So what do I do as a voter? One saying it's going to affect it, the other one saying no. And this is what gets into the whole talk about approach and attitude. Because the way the government has been behaving with the people, so reluctant to give answers, always downgrading them as, how dare you ask me any questions, makes us worry. And then you say, here's a report, I want you to believe this. With the potential chance of influence based on reports, we want us to take that and your approach is one that we don't even trust. Come on, Mr. Speaker. The government has made this decision for the people harder than it needs to be. But what do I do as a representative with those two conflicting reports? Do I take the risk of losing the whole 7 Mile Beach, regardless of how small the risk is? If it is 0.00001%, do we take that risk? Is this government, and again a key word, are going to gamble with that risk? Who am I supposed to trust? Which institution, which specialist am I supposed to trust? Which specialist is the people of Georgetown Central supposed to trust? Because I tell you what, Mr. Speaker, the way this government has handled the public and their questioning and their requests for information don't make me want to trust you. And that's why the people are questioning now. And that is exactly why today we're arguing a bill about a referendum. Because it all started, Mr. Speaker, first by a few citizens going, but hold on, let me ask you a little question about that. And then we'll get the information when it comes. The more they asked questions, the more the concerns came up. The more concerns came up, then, thank you. The more they decided to say, let's do our own research and check this out ourselves. And as they check it out, conflicting information. And then when they challenge the government to say, but that's not right, the government pushed back even harder. And then call them Muppets. And they said, you know what? I'm a Caymanian and this is democracy. I'm no Muppet. Started a people's initiated referendum process. That's why we're here. If you had respected the people and took time and respected the fact that they're the ones that put you in this house, we probably wouldn't be here now. Mr. Speaker, the other part, and I'm going to start to wrap up now, of concern was the wave action. Because Georgetown Central, we all know, we've all seen the videos of how it looks out there when the nor'wester hits. And an iconic church is right out there, right next to the port. The one that many of the Georgetown Central people have been going to all of their lives. So I met with the Minister of Tourism and said, can you please, I really don't want to argue, I don't want to fight you. Tell me about the wave action. I'm worried if you're going to dredge, the wave's going to get a bit bigger. I don't know no scientist, I don't know anything about that. Tell me. He said, don't worry, I'll get your report up to this day. And he can speak for himself. Up to this day, I haven't got the report from him. I had to go search for it myself, but I found it. And the Baird report referred to some of the concerns about the flooding risk and said something similar. Don't worry, nothing going to happen. We're going to bring the walls to make sure the waves don't affect the area. But again, I have the same problem. Do I trust them? Do I trust them? I'm worried about wave actions in the businesses out there on the waterfront and potential, if a hurricane come, will this dredging create greater waves to come wash my people away that live down Shedden Road? It's a concern that they have brought to my attention. And I asked the minister didn't even have the decency to give me the report. I had to go find it myself, but I found it. But now I don't trust it.
Mr. Speaker, in a point of order.
Will Deputy Premier.
The member has made all kind of accusations over there about what he asked me for, what I didn't deliver. Mr. Speaker, I truthfully do not remember him asking me for anything.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize and I wish the member good health and good memory. But it's not my fault that he didn't remember. I did ask. Mr. Speaker, maybe he will remember this. Did he remember publicly saying that he would have a meeting, his government would have a meeting with the people of Georgetown Central about this port? Bet you don't remember that either. But the media does. And if you would like to refute it, Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to show the media reports about it. But that's okay. That's not the point. The point is that I don't trust the report. And it's boiling down to the trust issue. Mr. Speaker, I'm wrapping up. Mr. Speaker, I know that cruise tourism is important. Our forefathers worked so hard. They were turtling, they were seafarers to build our little island, get the infrastructure going, and then people started to come and see our little beautiful little island. That was main foundation before financial services, before our national heroes came and built our financial services. So tourism is important. It is very important. And we have to make sure that we can maintain it. But what we have yet to clarify, and I say again, according to my manifesto and what I got elected on, is making sure it's quality over quantity. They talk about how many jobs will be lost. Maybe if I wasn't giving so much work permits away, you wouldn't be worried. Because if they stop giving out so much work permits, even if those jobs are gone, we'll still have jobs left because there's only 30,000 of us. Mr. Speaker, I challenge this government. You say you have a port, you have a plan for cruise and cargo for this country. That's your democratic right. You admit that there's a constitutional provision enacted, the People's Initiative Referendum. If you say you're not fearful of the CPR or anybody else about losing this vote, I challenge you to prove it. Here's what the challenge is. You publicly say, everybody get out and vote, including those who support, so we can clean up this little problem about the stay-home vote. I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to address this topic of 45 deceased people being on the list. I challenge you not to be afraid to allow the vote to be done by electoral district, unless you're afraid that one of your members is not going to support you because their constituency don't support the port. But no, let's see. The country listening. The country is watching. Let's see if you accept the challenge. Let's see what your motivation really is in respect to this port. Because if you think the people not listening, you can think again. And just like how the progressives' plan was to use one man, one vote to outdo the then government and premier of that day, trust me, the people behavior not change much. So go ahead. Go ahead with this approach and think that you can just undermine what the people's views are and you're not going to pay for it. Same thing is going to happen. Don't listen. It's not on me. I try my endeavor best to listen to them every possible way, and you're disenfranchising me for even finding out what they want me to do. That's our constitutional obligation, but you even want to hide that by mixing the votes together.
Tell them what, Mickey, what you say, you gotta get tired and fed up.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say the government has their right to promote what they believe in, because the simple fact is, whether we like it or not, they have been elected the democratic way. Some of us may not like who is elected. Some of us may not like who is the government. So I'm not going to fight you down for promoting your government. But be fair about it, man. Come on, man. How can you sit and accuse the now Speaker, former Premier, about his behavior of influence, but yet still almost duplicating exactly the same thing he did? That they say he did. I apologize, Mr. Speaker.
You know why? That was the right thing to do.
Well, if Mr. Speaker, if you are right by saying it was the right thing to do, that means they were hypocrites then. Mr. Speaker, I came into politics because I believe I'm a fighter by nature. My mother raised me that way. My mother raised hard, and she taught me to fight. And that's what the people sent me here to do. But boy, I tell you, some morals, we got some problems with morals in here, man. Just give the people a fair chance. That was simple, you know. If the people want it, they're going to tell you. Why are you trying to cheat them out of everything? You don't think the people are smart enough to know what is in the best interest for them? They are listening. And if they want the support, they are going to tell you. Stop doing the tricks, man. Mr. Speaker, I really thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this honorable house. I did not go through any financial elements of it because my good colleague will address those in short order. But Mr. Speaker, again, I challenge this government. If you are bold, if you believe your plan is that good, allow the necessary changes to stop the mixing of the votes. Have a talk with the CPR group, because now all of them are Muppets. I hear them calling out some names, and I think as much as they want to call their names out, those same two persons I'm going to talk about work harder than many of the politicians in this house to get this far.
You have traversed that ground quite a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Plenty, and I think you've gotten down to the end. You should utilize your time differently because you have, as I said, there's much repetition now on that point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll simply say this then. Again, I can only go by what my manifesto tells me, because I have to assume that this is what the people elected me on. This is what I released. And that is to build our tourism model based on quality, not quantity. Focus on our being environmentally conscious and be very unique. And I don't think our approach that we're taking is a very unique one. I'm not convinced. And I say this in closing, Mr. Speaker. Every person who is a resident of this country, we have to be mindful about our cargo operations. This administration knows that it has to move. It has to move, and we better start thinking about it now. You hear the government say, we better build the port now where we have opportunity. It won't cost us more in the future. You've heard that discussion many, many times about different projects. We have to start thinking about cargo, moving elsewhere. That's the only way we're going to bring life back to Georgetown Central, to Georgetown as a whole. And particularly for the members of Georgetown who were elected in the electoral district of Georgetown, you're supposed to be mindful of that concept too. So I encourage this government, please think long term. And if, Mr. Speaker, I beg them, in order for me to support this bill, I would like to see the mixing of the votes changed. It's disenfranchising me from being able to represent my people. And I'll give my word as my bond here today. If you allow the results to come by district, if the people of Georgetown Central say they want it by majority, I will stand publicly anywhere and support you. That's democracy. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity, and I want to say thanks to the other members of this House who have debated already. It's an honor to have dialogue and debate. And I say, though we may disagree, that doesn't mean I dislike you. But my job is to stand strong on behalf of my people. But Mr. Speaker, I realize that we didn't address one part because we got tied up. And it'd be wrong for me not to address it, considering my good colleague from Northside assisted me with the information. I showed you a chart from Sea Trade Cruise. And in that, it's a chart that shows the ships to be built from 2018 to 2027. Big, massive company responsible for building these ships. Now, overall, there's going to be 104 ships to be built over that period of time. 6 over 200,000 tons, that's the mega ships, that's the Oasis class. 8 over 180 tons, that's the Freedom class, those are the ones that currently is being tendered. And 90 smaller ships. 180,000, thank you, member. And I want you to recognize which companies that come to Cayman and what they have requested to be built on their behalf through this period of 2018 to 2027. And by company, Royal Caribbean has asked for 3 mega ships. Now, Royal Caribbean goes all over the world. So let's just say one of them come in to Cayman for the purposes of the argument of the government. They've also ordered 1 small ship. Carnival Cruises, they've ordered 0 mega ships, but 5 small ones. The Norwegian Cruise Line ordered 0 mega ships, but 6 small ones. So I know Royal Caribbean is the preferred bidder, but are we building this dock only for them? In the event that they actually send one of their ships, are we building the dock only for them? Come on, man. The people are going to put the facts together and find the information themselves. Mr. Speaker, hopefully the contribution that I offered here today will shed a little bit of light to the bigger picture, but also shed a little bit of light of my duties on behalf of the people of Georgetown Central. And I ask this government, do not disenfranchise me as a representative of the people of Georgetown Central. I want to know what my people feel so I can stand firm on their word, because that's how I represent. I don't know how you all represent, but that's how I represent. So I beg, please, let's change the mixing of the vote. The supervisor of election says all you have to do is say the word, his team is in place and is all ready to move. And there's only one thing that people can come to a conclusion on if you don't change that, and that's because you want to disenfranchise this House. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for my opportunity, and that's my contribution.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make my contribution on this bill that is currently before this Honorable Legislative Assembly. However, Mr. Speaker, before getting into my debate, I think it would be remiss of me to not recognize the historical importance of this day. Mr. Speaker, you yourselves being a student, and dare I say, a shaper of history, can now include in your memoirs that you were alive to see the very first people's initiated referendum here in the Cayman Islands. I think that it is also important that we, the members of this Honorable House, regardless of where we stand on this issue, recognize the importance of this milestone in the development of our democracy. If you of our own citizens, Mr. Speaker, our own Caymanians, came together, brought many others together, and by the efforts brought this Legislative Assembly gathered here today to deal with a matter of national importance. Mr. Speaker, there are still many countries around the world where this is not possible, where changes in the country does not come from the ballot, but rather by the bullet. And it's important that we recognize that we live in a country where the citizens can disagree with their government. This is something, Mr. Speaker, that we should never ever take for granted. Mr. Speaker, democracy itself is a system that recognizes that there'll be differences, disagreements, divisions, discord, and dissent in any society. But what democracy also encourages, Mr. Speaker, is that we discuss, we debate those differences, we debate those issues, and we come to some level of consensus. That is what democracy is about. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you yourself would know, because I think I borrowed this book from you. The word democracy itself comes from the Greek word for demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power or rule. In essence, Mr. Speaker, democracy is about the people, power. And I think it's fair to say that the fact that we are gathered here today to discuss this bill as a result of the efforts of many people outside has confirmed the old saying that the power in the people is greater than the people in power. And this is why we're here today. And Mr. Speaker, because 5,862 of our citizens signed the petition, of which 5,305 were verified by the election office, I think it is incumbent on us to recognize and record for the history books in the Hansards of this honorable House the founding members of the CPR group. Those individuals are as follows: Mario Rankin, Johan Moxham, Katrina Jern, Michelle Lockwood, and Gabriela Hernandez. Mr. Speaker, regardless of the outcome today, it is safe to say that those 5 individuals, in their own unique way, have left their fingerprints on our political history that we can now say to our children, grandchildren, and generations to come, or to borrow from Sir Winston Churchill, never was so much owed by so many to so few. Mr. Speaker, the bill before this Legislative Assembly is testament that democracy is alive and well in the Cayman Islands. It says to the outside world that the Cayman Islands have mechanisms in place to ensure that the people have their say when they don't like what the government is doing or the path that the government is embarking on. Mr. Speaker, I think it is the right decision regarding the cruise berthing facility that it is made by the people. It is the people of the Cayman Islands, after all, that we are all elected to serve. I understand that there are members on the other side that simply believe that they should just be trusted to do the right thing. Why? Why should the people trust the government? When the people went out and collected signatures, did the government trust them? No. The government wanted all those signatures verified. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is the people's turn to verify the ability and the credibility of the government. It is the ability for us to question our government is what makes democracy unique as a form of government. So, Mr. Speaker, let's take a look at the government's ability and credibility. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the government claims they have a mandate based on their election results. I am sure that everyone in this honorable House will agree that the PPM winning 5 seats in Georgetown and 2 seats in Cayman Brac in the 2017 election is no mandate. 7 seats out of a total of 19 seats is no mandate. Mr. Speaker, it is the government's position that this cruise berthing facility project was started years ago.
Mr. Speaker, if I may,
The Honorable the Premier.
if I may ask the member to allow me to make a point of clarification, because I think what he has just said about the mandate doesn't represent what the government has said or is saying.
He's agreeing for the clarification. You agreeing?
Of course, I have to give way to the Honorable Premier. Respect is due to this office, you know.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member. Mr. Speaker, the member's arithmetic is correct as far as the number of progressive members that were elected, 7. But the government is not made up of only progressive members. I was at pains yesterday, and perhaps I should have laid your manifesto of both the UDP and the CDP, its successor party, on the table as well, to demonstrate that that was the position of yourself and your party, and the seats which you have brought to the progressive, to the unity government. I should also remind the member that the other independent members on the government side, with the noted exception of the member for Prospect, who has explained himself and his position very clearly, all campaigned on the basis that a cruise and cargo port were necessary. It is as a result of that collective position that the government is able to say it has a mandate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Borden Down West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Premier for clarifying that issue. It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, since this project, as the Premier had noted before, and the reason why it's not subject to the new procurement law was actually started in a previous administration, it then begs the question that the Premier was actually indicating that the mandate to have started this wouldn't have come from the 2017 elections, but rather the 2013 elections, because the project was started prior to the 2017 elections as per the procurement rules that were being used. That's the reason why I was just working my way back, Mr. Speaker. So I do thank the Premier for clearing it up, but by his own admission in an earlier statement, this project is several years old and it was started previously. So we're trying to work out where the mandate came from in that regard.
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, may I go back then to 2013 when the Progressives won outright 9 seats, and a day later the Minister for Education, the Honourable Juliana O'Connor-Connolly, joined, giving us 10 seats. And to draw to the attention of the House and the member speaking what the 2013 manifesto actually said. Page 8, Mr. Speaker, and see also page 14. The Progressives will move swiftly to get the cruise berthing built, thereby providing major economic activity, putting people back to work, and boosting the tourist industry. So the mandate, Mr. Speaker, although in 2013 it didn't mention the cargo port, the mandate for cruise berthing derives from thence.
Member for Borden Town West, continuing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for Easton for clarifying to me that every time the Premier had put it in his manifesto, each election he got less and less seats. So, I mean, the PPM has a general rule. So, thanks for clarifying that. You know, well, 2017 it was 7 seats, 2013 9 seats, but we're working our way down. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the one time, Mr. Speaker, that the PPM did receive a clear mandate, and I remember that well because I was a member of the UDP at the time, was back in 2005 under the then leadership of Kurt Tibbetts. And I must say that, give credit where credit is due, to see a political machine at that time run 9 candidates and all 9 were successful. I think, even in any country around the world, that in itself is a formidable achievement. So, Mr. Speaker, the one time I think we can all agree that the first time that the PPM actually had a very clear mandate, undisputed, was in 2005. I think, and I'm sure the Premier can agree with me on that one. And, Mr. Speaker, you yourself may recall the criticism you faced during your first UDP administration, where you developed the Royal Water Cruise Terminal. And, it's kind of weird. I was listening to people giving credit in yesteryears gone by to the Berkeley Bushes and the different people who did their development on the port along the way. And I realized your name was missed, but I would also like to formally recognize your efforts, that what you have done in terms of developing the cruise terminal to what it is that we have today. And I think at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, you used up considerable capital in doing so, and it did cost you. But one of the things I want to look at, Mr. Speaker, is the PPM's 2005 manifesto. I have a copy here. It's kind of old, but just bear with me. I think this was previously laid on the House. Did you have your copy up there, Mr. Speaker? Can you get the Speaker the copy? So one of the things I want to, you still have the copy there? I want the Speaker to, 2005. When much people were better looking then, and yeah. Mr. Speaker, I want to just look at page 17 you have, of the 2005 manifesto, starting on the section Enhancing Tourism. And are you there yet, Mr. Speaker? Just making sure. It goes on to say tourism is the lifeblood of our economy. It is estimated that it contributes anything from 30 to 50% to our GDP, and that foreign exchange earnings from tourism could be as much as 70% of the total. But the tourist industry history of continuing growth and prosperity is no longer assured, not just because of international factors such as the aftermath of 9/11 and Hurricane Ivan, but for reasons also to do with both the quality and the costs of our tourism product. Bluntly put, the widely held perception is that Cayman is an overly expensive destination and the quality of its tourism product is on the decline. To a large extent, we are at the mercy of external factors which impact the industry, but there is certainly much that we can do about the quality of the product we offer and the widely held perception that the Cayman Islands are no longer good value for money. The PPM is of the view that the tourism management policy, which was developed by the tourism company, a consultant company hired by government, is an appropriate and relevant policy document which now requires some revisions post-Hurricane Ivan. The policy speaks to, among other things, improving our product offerings, creating a uniquely Caymanian experience for our visitors, managing cruise tourism, and protecting our environment. It is unfortunate that the UDP government, having adopted the tourism management policy, has failed to adhere to it. It goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, the PPM believes that our tourism industry can only be successful if our marketing, advertisement, and public relations functions are truly integrated. This cannot be achieved in a vacuum by the Department of Tourism. The policies and programs of Cayman Airways and our private sector partners will be important and necessary components of our national integrated marketing strategy. And page 17 concludes by saying, Mr. Speaker, the PPM recognizes that our private sector partners own and control the majority of our physical tourism product, and as partners they ought to have more input in the development of our tourism policies. The framework must be established to facilitate the integration of our private sector partners into the formulation of our tourism policy. Mr. Speaker, turn to page 18, and in particular, I'm going to be just reading the different points. I'm not going through all of them. But it goes on to say on page 18B that is, you can trust the PPM to understand that tourism cannot be left to develop unchecked. It needs to be managed in a sustainable way. 18C says, you can trust the PPM to recognize that the future of the tourism industry, and by extension the Cayman Islands, does not lie in mass tourism. I want you to remember that, Mr. Speaker, that promise. Recognize that the future of the tourism industry, and by extension the Cayman Islands, does not lie in mass tourism. 18D, Mr. Speaker, says, transition the Department of Tourism to a tourism authority with a board of directors comprising public and private sector representatives. This will significantly improve the management of our tourism industry, as all our tourism subsectors and stakeholders will represent in this body. 18G says, Mr. Speaker, create a uniquely Caymanian experience for our visitors and thereby address the perception that our product is too American or is just another Caribbean island experience. So right there, Mr. Speaker, what it's basically saying is that they recognize from back then that the Cayman Islands is a unique market, that we're not in the mass tourism business. I want just to emphasize that, just to say this is the philosophy in which it is coming from. And H goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, you can trust the PPM to protect, preserve, and promote our natural environment by instituting daily limits on the number of persons who visit places like Stingray City and certain dive sites. Again, Mr. Speaker, I think we can all agree that this is the kind of language that you want to make sure does not encourage mass tourism. Again, I just want to highlight that, and you'll understand why later on. And then 18J, Mr. Speaker, goes on to say, more effectively distribute our cruise ship passengers by creating additional product offerings in other districts and thereby significantly reducing the number of cruise passengers that are deposited on the 7 Mile Beach in the midst of our stay over visitors. This practice has caused untold damage to our reputation, and the answer lies in the better distribution of those cruise ship visitors who simply want to go to the beach and do a little shopping. So, Mr. Speaker, you can see thus far, there is a mindset, and I will tell you straight up, I support what is being said here. I mean, I don't want it to be said as if though this is not something I could have been supportive of. And I can also admit, Mr. Speaker, that even in 2005, I did mark a quiet X here for my colleague from Savannah, because at that time my grandmother insisted that we all gave him an X, even though I was still supportive of Roy and Gilbert at the time in Bordentown. So, but this is not something that we as Caymanians can't understand and identify with, that we are a unique destination. We're not into the mass tourism. Cayman is not for everyone. We have established that, and I think having a mandate like this, 9 seats, 9 candidates, 9 seats, 100%, this is the kind of mandate that the Caymanian people. And the reason why I brought up 2005, Mr. Speaker, is that this was the last time any government since, well, bear in mind the UDP back in 2009, had a clear mandate. And these are the kind of stuff that we're trying to look at in terms of what it is that the people actually wanted, and you can directly see where the people mindset is. But this is the last gauge we have of where someone was clear, or the public was clear in what it is that they wanted. On page 19, Mr. Speaker, and just looking at 19L, it says, you can trust the PPM to appreciate the importance of Caymanians interacting with our visitors as part of the visitors' overall impression of their holiday experience. This means that we will concentrate on getting more Caymanians into the tourism industry, not only because it will provide good and well-paid employment to our people, but because the PPM recognizes that our own people are critical to the quality of the tourism product itself. And I'll explain to you why later I brought that up, Mr. Speaker. 19.0, Mr. Speaker, says, you can trust the PPM to address the current image associated with the Cayman Islands of overdevelopment, traffic, and people congestion, notably at the western end of Grand Cayman, which is exacerbated by the mismanagement of cruise tourism by the UDP government. 19R goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, you can trust the PPM to understand that Cayman will never be a low-cost destination, nor should we strive to be. But we must provide good value for money spent. We must therefore improve the quality of our tourism product, excel in performance and service, and rid ourselves of the prevailing image of being overpriced. And finally, on page 19, Mr. Speaker, section V, you can trust the PPM to seek to manage overall development and growth, insisting on high standards and resisting development for development's sake. Resisting development for development's sake. A reason I chose to highlight these issues, Mr. Speaker, is that there's an old saying that says past performance is indicative of future behavior. 14 years ago, this was a mandate that the Premier and some of his other colleagues that are now in the opposition was elected on to deliver to the people of the Cayman Islands. And I think at the end of the day, I think we in this House can all agree, regardless of where we stood politically at that time, that these were items that we can all have signed up to. And in fairness, I think it was the right approach that we were looking at back then in terms of tourism. We are a unique market. We're not a mass tourism market. You know, and the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, is that the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, as my good friend leader of the opposition from Eastern would always say, that Warren Connell would always say that Cayman isn't for everyone. And we have always been able to distinguish ourselves by being a niche market. That is what it is that we have been about. We have never been about catering for the masses, because we do have our own challenges and limitations within our infrastructure. But the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, is that we all recognize that this referendum itself has now passed the point of just being about the port. This is really about a confidence issue, a performance issue. Do we trust the government to do this? You know, and the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, if you look on the same manifesto on page 13, just to put things in context, you know, there's a section on the far right-hand corner that speaks about addressing traffic congestion. And it says, I mean, just briefly, in 13A, you can trust the PPM to recognize that addressing traffic congestion requires a multifaceted approach, and there are no short answers or fixes. Again, this is 14 years ago. 13B, Mr. Speaker, you can trust the PPM to understand that building more roads is urgent required, but will not provide the necessary relief in the long run. It is impossible to build your way out of congestion. 14 years ago, you have said it 14 years ago. So, you know, and the thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, why I'm actually raising these issues is that those were the challenges we had 14 years ago, and we're still having these challenges again. And this is the trust issue that the government must recognize, that when they do say they want to undertake certain things, based on ability and your credibility and your past performance, people are naturally have the right to question what it is that you want to undertake. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that, you know, it is kind of rather ironic that when you go back to the start of democracy itself, which started in Greece, that Socrates himself made the point about candy shop owners, people in the business of selling sweets, being voted in over professions like, say, a doctor. Socrates argued that sweet shop owners can make the argument against a doctor that he gives you bitter syrups, pokes hole on you, cuts your skin, and take your blood. But he can offer you many sweets and candies. Surely no one in their right mind would vote for a doctor. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that in your 9 terms of being elected, that you came across a lot of those people who deal in sweets. I'm sure many of us in this honorable house would also be accused of even having a sweet mouth, or, as some would say, lyrics. But the irony in all of this, Mr. Speaker, is that when we start getting to democracy itself, it is still a system that is based on trust. And I think Reagan is the best one who basically says trust, but verify. And one of the things I really want to thank public and on the record, I know we said it jokingly while we were on break earlier, is to thank the Premier for the guidance that he has offered to me and my colleagues on this side very early on in my term. Back in August 27, Mr. Speaker, as you may recall, this Honorable House dealt with the strategic policy statement, and I will admit, as a newly elected freshman legislator, the government had laid out a very bold plan, ambitious, and I remember something along the lines where the Premier had even said this is his last term as Premier, and he was going to be very bold, and he was going to go all in. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for us to recognize, and I will say this much, is that I and my colleagues, and I hope every Caymanian, wish the government well and wish the government does well. No one should ever sit out there and wish the government fail or do anything bad, because at the end of the day, this is something that affects us all. And the Premier was right in that when we did get up and agree with him, he said, guys, listen, none of your job. If you're going to agree with the government, come and sit on this side. Your job is to question the government, keep us in check, and basically to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And this in itself, Mr. Speaker, is what democracy is about, the checks and balances that go with it. If we were to sit down here, and this is why we have the debate on these issues, is that we find a way to ash things out that we never looked at before. And this is why we must always, regardless of what our position is, just bear in mind that our role is to really and truly check each other. As I think Section 44(3) of the Constitution, where it directly says that the Cabinet itself is responsible to the Legislative Assembly, and every non-Cabinet member in this Legislative Assembly has a responsibility to make sure that the government does the right thing. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, at the time, and well, not at the time, but as looking back and I realize it, I recognize now that maybe, just maybe, at the time when the Premier was telling us that it was not his job, our job, to agree with him, I think that maybe it was maybe a little cry for help, to say, guys, help me to be a better Premier, help me to be a better person, help me to make sure that I keep my government in check, And the reason why I say that, Mr. Speaker, is that I believe that had we sat down and over the years challenge, not just the Premier, but even yourself when you were there, and I'm sure that you had your own experiences too, is that, maybe, just maybe, had we put more pressure on the government at the time, maybe the schools would have been built. Maybe Mount Trashmore would have been fixed. Maybe we wouldn't have unkillable mosquitoes roaming the streets of Cayman. So these are the kind of things, Mr. Speaker, why it is important for us to make sure that we have a robust democracy, we remain respectful, and we really and truly have these disagreements. Because at the end of the day, I can tell you, I've learned some stuff during some of the members on the opposite side in terms of their contribution. I've learned stuff. Yesterday, I listened to the North Side representative that I never learned before, So it is those kind of things, Mr. Speaker, that we just need to be more mindful of. And I think that is why it is incumbent on us to make sure as political leaders in this country that we never take anything personal. The people have a right to question their government. This is what it is that we are built on. But at the same time, too, we also do expect, to some extent, key leaders within our society be respectful towards the office that certain people hold. I can tell you, I've heard some descriptions being used to describe even some government members, which I've said to people, no, you can't do that. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, regardless of our differences, the job of everyone inside this house is to uplift Caymanians. And if we have to tear one person down to do our job, then we have started on the wrong foot. If you can't sit back and say something positive, or at least they say if you can't help, don't hurt. This is what this is supposed to be about. And I recognize that there are people with genuine concerns with the port on the environmental side. I still have questions concerning the ability to affect 7 Mile Beach. I'm still unsure of that. I've read one report, I've read the CCMI report, both are contradicting, so it's kind of difficult, And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that really gave me pause a few weeks ago was an article in the Jamaican Gleaner. Let me see if I can find a copy for you here. Chris, sorry, let's give this to the speaker here for me, please. Yeah. One of the things, Mr. Speaker, and that's just for your edification, is that the headline in that article was that Jamaica banks. Yeah, the headline on that article, Mr. Speaker, is that Jamaica banks on cruise berth for uptick in cruise passenger arrivals. And in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, not to get into to read the entire article, and that's the problem when you don't buy focus glasses, is that Jamaica numbers for the month of June that was reported in the article actually went down, actually for the ease of the listening public and members, because you would have a copy and they wouldn't. Let me just read it here briefly for you. It's not that long. It says, Jamaica has reported another contraction in cruise passengers arrival for June 2019, but there is hope that the country could see increases in arrivals, given plans for the development of a new cruise berthing facility in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. Cruise passengers arrival to this country dipped 27.9% for the month of June to a total of 66,552 passengers. Data from the Jamaica Tourist Board showed that passengers visiting the port of Ocho Rios fell by 20.7%, with 25,569 passengers, while visitors to the port of Montego Bay fell by 42.4% to 17,144 passengers. The article goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, Falmouth has also recorded a decline of 20.1% to 23,839 passengers. The contraction in cruise passengers arrival has impacted sales for Dolphin Cove attraction, which gets 50% of its cruise ships from guests from the Falmouth port. This is primarily due to the Oasis of the Seas class of vessel not being able to have the ship called in Grand Cayman. Vice President of Cruise Shipping at the Port Authority, William Tatum, told the Financial Gleaner. The ship is so large, they have to clear all the parts to do security screening on the passengers on shore, and because of that, they weren't able to have the ship called on Grand Cayman, he continued. Traditional itinerary for cruise routes to the Western Caribbean were Haiti, Jamaica, Grand Cayman, Cozumel, Mexico's largest island, and back to Florida. The article goes on to say, Tatum noted that with a highly rated destination at Grand Cayman is, in addition to the fact that more vessels were being built for voyages to the eastern end of the Caribbean, some passengers have opted to visit the 4 ports of call on the eastern side versus the 3 ports of call on the western end of the Caribbean, which includes Jamaica. For the 6-month period, January to June 2019, Jamaica saw 902,088 cruise passengers arrival visiting the shores, a decline of 12.4%, or 127,793 cruise passengers. Because the West Sail was missing Grand Cayman, we saw a decline in the Oasis class. The good news is that the Grand Cayman is very optimistic about building a new port berth to accommodate the Oasis, and the Royal Caribbean has been very much saying that we will see a turnaround, so the numbers for Falmouth will climb right back up, Tatum reasoned. Grand Cayman's planned pier and berth are expected to be operational by 2022. Carnival Cruise Line and Royal Caribbean will help fund the project, which will cost $200 million. Now, Mr. Speaker, the part that really got me on this article was that their argument was that Jamaica number was down because Cayman, the bigger ships were missing Cayman, and as a result, it affected Jamaica because they're all part of the Western itinerary. But here is the problem I had with that, Mr. Speaker, is that when you go and you look at, one second. One second, Mr. Speaker. Sorry. Yeah, when you go and look at Cayman results, Mr. Speaker, for the month of June that Jamaica was actually looking at, Cayman actually had more than, for the month of June, Cayman actually had 104,527 passengers, or just under 38,000 more passengers than Jamaica. So the question, Mr. Speaker, was this. If both Cayman and Jamaica are part of the Western itinerary, Jamaica has 3 ports, 5 piers. Cayman have 1 port and no pier. But yet we still had 38,000 more passengers than Jamaica that month. The argument doesn't hold water, because it means that the ships were coming here, they just weren't carrying them to Jamaica. And I could understand if Jamaica had the same amount of passengers as Cayman, you could have said, okay, maybe there's some argument that it can carry water. But in this scenario, Mr. Speaker, that argument don't carry water, for the simple fact that we had more than Jamaica, and the cruise lines just did not go to Jamaica. They brought the passengers here instead. So if we were to build the piers as that article would insinuate, Mr. Speaker, what guarantees would Jamaica have that we would basically be in
Honorable Member, I don't know how much longer you propose to go, and I propose to take the evening break.
I'll be going for quite a while, Mr. Speaker.
Quite a while?
Yeah, you can take the break now if you want.
We
then.
shall take the evening break and come back at 7 o'clock. Honorable members, I understand we propose to conclude this bill tonight. Let's try to get back in on time. 7 o'clock, House is suspended.